So pleased to welcome Stuart Fearn from AKW, who's helped us to develop a new guide that's on our website around kitchen design. That's very much based on some work that Stuart and his colleagues have done at AKW. So I'll add your slides to the stage, Stuart, and hand over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul. Thanks. My name's Stuart Fearn. I'm one of the regional directors of sales for AKW. As Paul said, we've been working on a accessible kitchen design brochure based on wheelchair users, and we're going to. I'm just going to cover some of the fundamentals on the designs on this one. You can download it via the website there. I'm sure the links will go over on the side as well. You can email our marketing, or you can talk to any of our business development managers as well, and they'll be able to sort you out with as many copies as you need. Okay, so I mean, the kitchen is normally described as sort of the hub of the home, if you like, but it is quite often overlooked within adaptations, where priority might be given to bathrooms and other areas of the house. Partly because a lot of the time they expect if it's multiple occupancy, they'll expect other people to do the cooking. And they're quite an expense as well. It might just need a lower bit of worktop in certain areas, but it is it's an integral space really within the house for family contact, social interaction. So really, it should be considered just as important to be able to access it from all family members and the user themselves. So there are some key questions really when designing a kitchen. How is the kitchen currently used, and is it by all family members or just one person? Is it going to change in the future? Is the person's condition going to change? Is it going to need further changes to be made later down the line? So thinking about future proofing. What space is needed to make sure that you've got adequate thoroughfare? So do you need to potentially move doors, move access points to make sure that you've got enough space in the kitchen for somebody to be able to have adequate turning circles? What appliances are necessary? What do they use at the moment? Do they use an oven, a hob? It might be now air fryers, toasters, microwaves, everything really, taking that into account as well. Obviously, with a wheelchair accessible kitchen, quite often you're taking out a lot of storage space underneath units so people can get closer to the worktops. So you've got to find that elsewhere and other alternatives for that. And also how much workspace is required. A lot of the time we're dealing with fairly small kitchens, so it's making the most out of the space that we have available. So we work really with a person, occupation, environment model of practice. And that allows you then to sort of look in detail of exactly what's needed of that individual and the rest of their household if relevant. So the client is the person that we need to observe and understand their requirements, what skills they have, what skills they potentially don't have, and what barriers they currently have within that environment that we need to modify. The environment, that includes the building, the area that you're working on. So not only the construction as to whether you can, things like you can move doorways and things like that, but also to take into account heating, to take into account lighting as well within that environment. And then lastly, the occupation, which is who's going to be using the kitchen. Potentially, is it going to be a child that wants to develop their cooking skills? Is it going to be an adult, an older person who wants to be able to make a sandwich and a drink of an evening without having to be reliant on a carer? So when you sort of overlap those areas, that gives you that occupational performance area, which is where you can influence the design. So working onto layout really with that, you should always avoid, and we see quite a few where kitchens have been designed where you have a wheelchair user, maybe a hob one side, a sink the other, where they've got to carry across hot pans, hot food. You want to avoid that wherever you can by trying to allow for a continuous length of worktop so somebody can actually move an item along it rather than carrying anything across. As I've said there about doorways as well, try and create that easy thoroughfare so you're not getting in the way of people. It's not going to cause any potential accidents or slips or anything in the kitchen. So some potential pros and cons of layouts, of common layouts that you would see. So a one-sided kitchen is great. You can have two people working next to each other, so you can have somebody there who's able to give assistance. It also gives you plenty of space behind as well, so plenty of room for people to manoeuvre around. Might be slightly lacking depending on the size of the kitchen, on worktop space, on what you need to where you can actually operate. The next one is a two-sided kitchen, so like a galley type kitchen, where you've still got the same benefits of that one-sided, but also you've got worktop space. It's not always ideal because potentially you might be lifting heavy items from one side to the other. You then have a U-shaped kitchen, so objects on this can be moved right the way along the worktop. Gives really easy wheelchair access as well. But again, it can be restricted depending on the size of the area you have available, because you're going to be restricting the turning circle if it's a small kitchen. And then finally, you have an L-shaped kitchen, which is probably one of the better options because again, you can move items along the worktop. You haven't got to lift anything. People can have independent workstations on there, and you get plenty of room for wheelchairs and turning circles on there. So we suggest a 1.5 by 1.5 metre circulation space to be able to move around between floor-facing units, or it might be a unit between the unit and the wall as well. It makes sure that then you've got plenty of space there. You haven't got you've got a lot of room to manoeuvre. One thing to take into account though is actually where we produce kitchens, we do a very deep recessed plinth. So potentially if you've got a plinth that's recessed 300mm either side of the kitchen on that U-shaped one, it actually gives you an extra 600mm because that plinth will take into account the foot plate of the chair, but also their feet as well. So it proves really, really useful where you've got restricted spaces to have that increased size of plinth. Onto worktops. One of the first things to decide is what sort of worktop, if it's going to be just a single individual user, where they'll always want a standard height worktop, maybe slightly lower, or whether you've got multiple users and you need a rise and fall unit. Obviously, rise and fall units have changed over the years when they used to have crank handles, if anyone remembers, and looked like they were designed by JCB. They're now operated by two really easy to use buttons. It's important to think about where those controls are located, and normally on sort of the dominant side, so somebody has got no problem using it. The one we've got there, that picture doesn't show a vanity panel. Sometimes it's great to cover up pipe work and things like that because if you've got pipe work, if you've got electrical cabling at the back of the unit, then there's always that potential that somebody could get caught in it with the wheelchair, get anything caught on it. So you can have a vanity panel. Something to obviously consider with that on the other side is that if you've got a vanity panel there, has that person still got enough space to be able to draw himself closer to the unit? One thing, people put hobs into them. You can see we've got a hob there with a kettle. You can put sinks in them, are very common as well. One thing to consider with a sink is to use a shallow bowl sink. So not only does that give additional space underneath the worktop, but also it means that somebody hasn't got to lean further forward to get the last teaspoon out the bottom of the sink. And always with sinks as well, to have a heat pad on the bottom, so it doesn't then, if it's lowered down and on top of somebody's legs where they haven't got any sensation, potentially you're burning somebody with the heat transfer from the water. So always put a heat pad as well underneath the sink. Appliances, the best oven to use, if anybody watches Bake Off, Neff brought out their slide and hide oven, not particularly for our for our industry and our needs, but it's been an absolute fantastic product. It's one where it's a front opening oven that comes down, but also the door slides underneath the oven, so it keeps that hot surface right out the way. So a fantastic product. But also side opening doors are very good as well. Make sure that it's an oven that has either left or right, so that can be adjusted depending on where it needs to be positioned. We always line up as well. We always recommend that you line up the most commonly used shelf in the oven almost level with the worktop, so you can take something out. You're not reaching up to take a hot lasagna out of the oven and then bringing it back down again to get it onto the worktop. So it's almost an even height. You can even take it out onto a heat-proof tray in front of the oven maybe, and then reposition to put it onto the worktop. Always telescopic rails rather than the ones that the sort of metal trays that just slide in to grooves in the oven. To have telescopic rails fitted so that the shelf can come out, you get plenty of access to it, and it's not going to tip forward and run the risk of scalding or burning somebody on it. Appliances, induction hobs are by far the best option. They can be a little bit more expensive. A lot of the time it used to be that saucepans weren't always induction hob ready, so a lot of people had to change saucepans to use it. A lot more now on the market. Most saucepans that I think you can get are sort of induction friendly. You can actually buy things through Amazon and eBay that's like a plate that you can put a saucepan onto that turns it into an induction pan as well. They are great because they're really, really easy to clean. Obviously, they're totally flat on top. They turn off and don't activate if there's not a saucepan detected by it. And they've got a really low temperature after use, so they cool down really, really quickly. So reduce that risk of burn injuries. Obviously, we'd never recommend a gas hob, because if somebody's leaning over to get a pan, you've got an open flame there. That's the same reason as well with front controls, if you can, on a hob. So nobody's leaning across. You've got a risk of knocking a saucepan over. Always try and get a hob with remote controls at the front. A little thought as well, microwaves, they predominantly come left-hand hinged. So when you're thinking about designing the kitchen, making sure that that's taken into account, so they're not going, having to travel back out around the door of the microwave or whatever to get to the worktop. And because we're losing, so much storage space is taken from underneath the units, you've still got to have that, access to those. And okay, it's in wall units. It used to be the case that you'd have the old style pull down baskets, if people remember them, very sort of rickety. They'd shake and knock everything off as they pulled down. And when you let go, you fire your beans up through your kitchen ceiling. The range that we have now are, they're adjustable. You can adjust the tension in them to suit the tenant, exactly to suit, their abilities to be able to pull it down. So they pull down really smoothly, nice solid units. But we also do, as we have in the image there, an electrically operated rise and fall cupboard that not only comes down, but it comes forward. So it comes forward diagonally to the front of the worktop. So you get plenty of access to that. Comes with the up and down buttons, which can be located wherever you want them, or remote controlled as well. So you can have it on a remote controlled option. Gives you full access to the store cupboards. A few of the last sort of finishing touches. One thing we introduced last year was the grabber rail, which a lot of you might be familiar with. If you come into a house that's been adapted, normally you have grab rails. You can take them from the garden right through the hallway, into the lounge, into the bathroom. The only place it's really difficult to put one in the past has always been the kitchen. So the grabber rail sits underneath the worktop, gives a really good support rail. So if they're in a wheelchair but are able to sort of stand and want to support themselves for a while, it's great for that. It's great as well to be able to allow wheelchair users to be able to pull themselves closer to the work surface. So it's a really good product for that. Very, very simple, but I think a lot of the best ideas normally are. Lighting is a real consideration. Always use as much natural light as possible, but obviously you're not going to get that at night time. So it's always good to consider, what the lighting is, what the standard lighting is in the kitchen, and whether you could utilise task focused lighting, maybe on certain areas. If somebody's used to making a cup of tea of an evening, highlight that, sort of a tea area, highlight the sink, maybe even inside cupboards and things like that, or inside drawers. Colour contrasting as well is very good to keep certain products, if they need to be. If somebody has got visual impairment, then to keep it within the light reflective value to enhance the visibility of certain items. And obviously flooring, a lot of the time, if it is somebody who's ambulant, or if they're able to stand in the kitchen or walk through it, then obviously it needs to be non-slip flooring in there as well. So I've sort of flown through a lot of the items there. Where we are now at a stage when you can actually see a fully adapted kitchen there, but actually it's a nice looking adapted kitchen. I'd have no problem with having one of those in my house if my kitchen was big enough, but it does sort of cover all the things there. Get a copy of the guide, because everything's sort of detailed in there as well. With some really good features and bits that we pick up on, and obviously we have a free of charge surveying service as well if ever anybody needed one. Thanks ever so much for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Stuart. I think there were, so let's have a look. So Jennifer was asking about what happens if something goes wrong with the adjustable height worktop.
Nothing goes wrong with them. What go wrong with our worktop? How dare you, Jennifer?
I suppose if somebody got a carrot or something stuck in the so who'd come out and fix it?
So we have if it's one of our worktops, we have our own internal engineers. So we have a nationwide AKW engineers. If ever there is a problem, we're out within 72 hours. I think we run at about 40 hours at the moment. If it does go wrong, I mean, we don't get a lot of issues with them. Sometimes it will be water access or something like that. So, it might be a case where we've been out, and if water's got down the back onto the control box, then we'd sort that. We'd replace the control box, and we'd make recommendations about where to put it for the future as well. So anything like that, you can get in touch with our technical team, and they would run through it.
Okay, and Jennifer's got a lot of questions this afternoon. So is there a little AKW badge somewhere on them, so that if somebody goes back years later, they know where to go to?
I'm pretty sure there is. We normally leave as well, details and within the fitting instructions and things that's got our details on there. We can trace back invoices from sort of 10 years ago, I think, on some of them. So there are AKW logos. I believe they're inside the cupboards as well.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. As you say, the full guide's available via AKW, and we've added a kitchen design guide to our website as well, so that kind of based very much on AKW's guide. That for anybody who's interested, you can also find it at foundations.uk.com. So, thank you, Stuart.